everybody, and welcome to our panel on Youth Action for Climate Education. Welcome to all of you joining us on Zoom and all of our public viewers on YouTube. We really hope that you're enjoying your mock EMS so far. Before we start, I just want to remind you of a couple of bits of important information. A reminder first that we have live interpretation. This session will be held in English, so if you need interpretation into Spanish or French, please follow the guidelines on the screen right now. Please join an interpretation channel by clicking on the interpretation mode and choosing the language that you would like to hear. For better sound quality, you can mute this original audio. Speakers, please remember to speak slowly and clearly and avoid regional vocabulary, acronyms, and jargon where possible. Thank you so much to our team of volunteer interpreters supported by Common Languages. Please be patient and share your compassion with them. We have a team available for technical support throughout the event, so please send them a message via the chat or the delegate WhatsApp group if you need any assistance throughout this event. Those providing support will have technical support or technical assistance in their Zoom name. I'm just going to give you a couple of seconds now to join your relevant language channels. So, in this panel, we're going to hear from a breadth of youth climate and youth climate education activists on the campaigns that they've been running or what they're fighting for, and the climate education systems that they want to build. Youth movements are vital to inspiring and creating climate action, from Fridays for Future to us here at MockCOP. Youth-led grassroots change has shaped the climate movement and helped create real change in real communities and real countries across the world. When it comes to climate education, young people have a massively important role to play in pushing for it, and we should be included when decision makers are creating policy around it. I'm Phoebe L. Hansen. I'm a climate activist that tries to leverage the power of non-state actors in climate governance, particularly of businesses and of young people. In 2020, I co-coordinated MockCOP 26, the predecessor to this conference. And in 2021 at COP26, I worked with the COP presidency, which was the UK, to convene the original Education Ministers Summit, where we convened education and environment ministers for the first time ever at a COP, facilitating pledges from 25 countries. I'm joined today by two amazing young activists who are going to introduce themselves and their stories in so much more detail. But to briefly welcome them, we have Sej Lanier, the founder of Sustainable and Just Future, and we have Aishwarya Putta, an Indian-Canadian climate justice activist. Unfortunately, one of our panelists, Bilal Mohammed, is no longer able to join us due to some extenuating circumstances. We're going to have some time at the end for some questions, so we can ask some pre-submitted questions from all of our delegates to these speakers. Thank you so much for submitting your questions throughout the last couple of days. So, before I go on to my fellow speakers, I just wanted to tell you some more about my own experiences. So, when I was growing up, my family and I would joke that I would spend more time in a classroom than at home. I'm the daughter of a teacher, so I would spend my whole time in a classroom all around education. It's kind of in my blood. When I think about climate change in so many ways, I think about it as something that can't be unintertwined from education. Everything we think about in climate change and climate governance is something that is also an issue of public participation and public knowledge. When we talk about climate finance, we should think about the way that the public is going to perceive climate finance, the way that they will perceive climate science, the way that the public will perceive policies, and the way that young people and politicians engage local communities in the governance that happens within COP centres. Climate governance is something that is very inherently pulled away from everything else. It's something that happens in a small blue zone at a COP, something where you need an accredited access to be able to get in. And that's something that's so inherently inaccessible for so many people across the world. And in giving climate education, we not only equip people across the world with these skills to be able to actively participate in climate conversations in their local areas and with their local politicians and their national governments, we also give them a chance to be able to participate in international events like COPs. We give people the chance to be able to democratize climate events like the COPs. And for me, that's the most crucial thing. When I was in school, my climate education was very little more than a page in a textbook. Because I wasn't a scientist or a geographer, I was considered as not a priority for climate education. And when I say that, I'm still aware that so many people on this call will have had less climate education than that I'm in so many ways very lucky. But still, when I looked at the news, when I saw the things that were happening outside of my window, I saw things that I were not equipped to deal with. I saw things that made me feel scared, that made me feel powerless, because without that foundation of understanding of what climate change and what climate policy making was, I didn't understand what was going on, and I didn't understand the way that I could contribute to the solutions for it. For me, instead of seeing problem paired with solution, I just saw a problem. I saw something that could never be solved, and especially being so physically small as a child or as a young person, it is difficult to see myself as somebody that could really be a part of a solution. So I spent so much of my childhood being scared of what my future would look like and what the next couple of years would hold for me. And that's something that I'm sure all of you have experienced in some way, and something that we want to help other people not experience. Through this work, I really hope that we will help climate teaching and learning to be advanced in so many more countries across the world, using important precedents from countries that are taking really key action towards climate education, and also driving the way for new change, innovative change that we can see both in policy making and at the grassroots level. Working for Mock COP, I've also coordinated a campaign called Teach the Teacher. In the UK, we bring that into 200 UK schools a year, but it also works in 20 more countries. And I see so many names on this chat of people that have been involved in Teach the Teacher in so many other ways. Aishwarya, I think, was involved in Teach the Teacher at some point in time. There are so many of us that facilitate this one campaign that is able to bring students into their schools to teach their teachers about the climate emergency, where young people are given a chance to take agency over their own education, but also instead of just teaching one room of children, that we can then teach a teacher to be able to teach so many more rooms. It helps give a sense of amplified impact, making sure that everybody feels equipped to deal with climate change in their future. So for us, this Mock EMS doesn't just mean policy making, it also means what we can do at the grassroots level to understand everybody on our local communities and what they're experiencing, and making sure that any action that is taken is done with the consent and the full participation of people on the ground. And with that, I'm going to pass to Sage to talk about her experiences and to talk about her campaigns. Thank you, Sage.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. My name is Sage Lanier, and I'm currently based in New York City. I just moved here last week, which is it's really overwhelming for me. So I got my start with climate education, specifically at Berkeley. As an undergraduate, it was my second year, I believe. I started teaching a class of my own design. And the reason I started teaching was because I felt like the environmental education I was getting was really poor. Berkeley has one of the best ranked environmental education programs in the world, but it is really, really doomsday. And I felt like every course I was taking was understanding how bad the problem is and nuances of the problem and the details of the problem. And have you read this research that your professor, did on how bad the problem is and how we're all screwed and it's totally too late and nothing's savable? And I was just watching all these really passionate people around me wilt. And a lot of people were considering changing out of the environmental college because people were just felt so defeated. And it was crazy to watch these professors stop a movement before it could even get started. The environmental movement's really small. And a lot of people who I know who went to college for environmental things or were passionate about it as teenagers are not anymore, because there's not, we don't really have a game plan. We don't really have a path forward. It doesn't feel like. So I was really frustrated with the education I was getting. And that's why I started my own course. And so what I set out to do was create a crash course, everything you need to know about the planet. I was like, if I could just get everyone on the planet, you know what I mean, into a room for a certain amount of time, what would I think they really needed to know? So it's really accessible. It's very no jargon. You don't need, my aim was for it to be understandable by the average 15-year-old. So we do a host of problems or solutions, I guess. We do food systems, and we talk about like a circular economy and economic degrowth, kind of posing like we have to degrow the economy. That's the ultimate climate solution. Like, they're already telling us renewable energy won't meet our goals by staying under 1.5. Like, we actually have to reduce the amount of energy we use overall. And so how do we do that? And so we're looking at, decarbonization and even things like urban planning to try to like have like a real cohesive vision for what a climate resilient future looks like. It's very solutions oriented, it's very action focused. And we also are constantly throughout that program, like trying to get our students involved with environmental initiatives and organizations in the area. And so that class is a big deal now. It started off with 25 students, and by my 5th semester teaching it, we had 300 people enrolled, which had never been done before. And then all this press started rolling, and it was like the New York Times and the World Economic Forum, and it just kind of like took off. And obviously COVID, and then it was online, so we kind of like scaled back, and now we're doing like 150 to 200 students a semester with that program. And earlier this year, I decided to launch it as a nonprofit. I was getting so much feedback from students at other schools around the world that like their climate education or their environmental education was the same. And the same phenomena is happening, like the movement staying small because we're like discouraging people from getting involved in the first place. And by and large, that is the responsibility of these older generations who are responsible for delivering the education. So I really like the for young people by young people approach. And we are now moving into universities and high schools. Right now, we're just in the United States just because that's pretty much like the audience that we have, but we're like, open to being international. So we are setting up some pilot programs for the fall semester, kind of in New York to try and like make connections and get funded and whatnot. That's a huge part of it. And yeah, so that's like the gist of how I got into climate education. And I really feel like this program or this framework, I guess, because it shouldn't be limited to like, programs where you like, I don't think that the knowledge should be gate kept at all. And thinking about like turning it into a book for that reason. But I do think that this framework is revolutionary because I don't think like I personally like I set out to do something I'd never seen before. And that was, yeah, a roadmap for stabilizing humanity within our ecological boundaries. And there's things like drawdown and whatnot. But for one, drawdown is not very well known amongst young people. And two, it is a little controversial, like it's missing some solutions. I do really like them though. But also just it's not, it's great to have a website and some, like charts and stuff, but it's not visionary. It doesn't help you see what that better world could look like. And so we've had incredible amounts of or incredible feedback from this program. 2/3 of our participants are non-environmental majors and 98% approval rate. And I'm trying to think, 71% of our program participants said that they decided to get involved with an organization or initiative as a direct result of the program. And the testimonials have just been crazy. Like I sat down at dinner with someone the other day who took it like 3 years ago, and she's literally working on nuclear fusion. She's a genius. And she was like, Sage, your class was life-changing for me. And I was like, wow. There's so many people who have feedback like that. And I don't think it's because, I mean, I'm not going to like downplay the incredible amount of work that went into it. But at the same time, like, I don't think that it was that revolutionary. It was just the fact that no one had decided to put things together in that format before of being solutions oriented and action oriented, which is a little sad, but also like, all right, we're going now. So yeah, that's my short intros to my involvement in climate education.
Thank you so much for that, Sage. We're now going to hear from Aishwarya.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. I'm so excited to be here, first of all. And yeah, those are really beautiful stories. This is kind of a whole like full circle moment for me because my climate education journey actually started with Mock COP. And so, yeah, in the first stage of Mock COP, when we had like the original Mock COP 26, right? I was actually a speaker on climate education. And back then I was in grade 10. So, and now I just graduated high school. So I'm 18 now, just graduated high school. So that was like around 3 years ago, which is a long time. Well, for me now. But so I started with Mock COP, I did the speech, and then from there I realized I have all these thoughts, I have all these words in my mind, but I want to be able to do something about it, right? So I was working with a group called Fridays for Future Digital, and in fact, Phoebe was also working with them at the time. And basically, we were a digital version of the Fridays for Future movement. And the reason we existed in the first place was to allow people who do not either have the privilege or could get in potential like legal risks and face criminal charges if they were to go protest in the streets of their nation. So this was a platform for them to be able to protest, right, digitally. So we helped make toolkits. We did a lot of activism work, which involved email storms, petitions, things like that. And through Fridays for Future Digital, I decided, okay, maybe we could, because it was all young people. It was all like high school students. You know, we had people from the age of like 14 to I think 26. So it was all really young people. So we kind of were able to do whatever projects we wanted. And so I decided to start something climate education related, and we would do these like art builds every week. And art builds are basically where you get together and create some sort of placards or signs, right, for protests. But within those art builds, we shared knowledge. And I think that was a really beautiful way of seeing how climate education could be spread, because it was just us telling stories of our lives to one another over these calls. And these were people from all across the world, right? And we would talk about, there were people on the front lines who talk about like their own experiences with facing climate change and the impacts of climate change. And then there were people on the other sides of the world who maybe were doing policy work and would talk about the work they're doing. So it was such an interesting group of people, and it was such an interesting way of being educated by the climate through storytelling. And I guess that's kind of where my whole journey of understanding the importance of storytelling behind climate change came out to be. So after Fridays for Future Digital, I moved on to actually work for Mock COP again, but as a campaign coordinator for Teach the Teacher. And so, yeah, it's been amazing watching Teach the Teacher grow, because I was there at the very start. I wasn't only there for Mock COP for this stage, but I was there till the last stage that just happened before this. So originally we started Teach the Teacher like as a project. We weren't sure how many schools were going to join. We were very unsure, right? But we just wanted to do it. And the whole point behind Teach the Teacher is that it's a campaign where young people are able to convey their concerns to their educators through what educators do best, and that is teach, right? So we gave workshops, we gave presentations to our very own teachers about climate change, and we provided them with resources for them to go and then actually implement all of the resources that we gave them and all the knowledge that we gave them to their students themselves. So over, I think, 2 years of Teach the Teacher, we were able to reach 21 countries, which was absolutely crazy. And we had students from all across the world, students of various levels. We had students in middle school, right, like sixth graders. Actually, my sister also was involved with Teach the Teacher, and she just finished grade 8, right? And she was in grade 7 when she did a Teach the Teacher, which was really cool. And then we also had some people in universities as well do some Teach the Teacher presentations, which was incredible. And I think the moment when I realized how impactful these sort of educational experiences can really be was at my own school, right? So I did a Teach the Teacher presentation in grade 11. And after that, I got to know that the Teach the Teacher presentation that I conducted was recorded and was then a law teacher from my school had put it into the curriculum itself. So yeah, which is crazy because the next semester, these random kids came up to me in my school and were like, oh, you were in my curriculum. We had a homework project about you. And I was like, what? That is crazy. So simple things like these can go such a long way, right? And now every single year, kids in that class are going to be learning about the climate and environment because of an initiative like this. And actually, 2 days ago, I got to know from a friend that apparently in their geography class, teacher was also talked about. And this was in the same school as that I went to. And he was like, yeah, no, I knew you since grade 9. You didn't know me, but I know you now. But we knew you because of Teach the Teacher, and our geography teacher was talking about it, and we did projects related to it to understand the environment. So yeah, I think Teach the Teacher really broadened my horizons regarding climate education and showed me how much of an impact young people can have within their own schools and on their own educators. And then after that, actually, while I was working for Teach the Teacher, I went to the United Nations Biodiversity Conference in December of last year. That was actually an eye-opening experience for me. That was the experience that made me decide I want to go into policy work and what I actually want to do for my undergrad. So during that time at the UN Biodiversity Conference, it was in Montreal. I'm currently located in Ontario in Canada. So it was very near. And then when we went there, we actually were able to speak to some people who were a part of doing incredible work within governments in Canada regarding climate education, and people who had these huge NGOs regarding climate education. And when I spoke to them, in policy rooms, normally you don't really feel heard because as young people, there's not really a space for you to speak in the first place. But that was the first time I genuinely felt heard in a place where people in power were residing in, right? And I still have their contacts, and they're still willing to do work with us, and they're still listening. And I think that's also when I realized that I said this at the very beginning when I did that speech for Mock COP, and I said that we are one of the very first generations to face the impacts of climate change, yet we're the last that can do anything about it. And in that room, that's exactly what I felt, right? Sitting in that room, I was like, this is the power that we hold as young people, because we are seeing the impacts and we are able to provide the solutions, right? And the only way we'll be able to provide those solutions is by working together, whether it be with policymakers, whether it be with people on the front lines, or whether it be internationally with one another. And yeah, I think the last bit of my story with climate education is with Banking on a Better Future, which is a current climate group that I still work with. Banking on a Better Future is basically a group that is based in Canada, and we focus our work around targeting the big 5 banks of Canada, right? So that's RBC, CIBC, BMO. You don't really need to know the names because I'm not sure how many of you are really from Canada, but essentially these big banks have invested nearly $1.1 trillion into fossil fuel companies since 2016, so the Paris Agreement, right? And this money actually comes from us. So this is the money that citizens put into their banks. Then this money is pooled together and loaned out to fossil fuel companies. And this money is what enables fossil fuel companies to continue the work that they do. And Unfortunately, young people don't know that. Actually, not just young people, a lot of people don't know that. People are always surprised when we talk to them about this, about what a pivotal role banks and private corporations play in these big fossil fuel projects. So as Banking on a Better Future, what we try to do is we do like a lot of campus action. So through universities and through students, because young people are banks' biggest clients. And that's because the moment you start banking with a bank, you're probably going to stay with that bank for the rest of your life, because no one wants to move their assets. No one wants to move their bank account, right? And so university campuses are their main target. And so as working for Banking on a Better Future, what I would do is I'd give workshops for high school students to learn about climate literacy, but also financial literacy and the links between them both, and understand where banks play a role in this and how there are alternatives. They're called credit unions, right? And that young people, like, literally, it's literally in our hands. Like, the moment we stop banking with them is the moment they're getting a hit, and the moment that they're losing, right? And the moment that they're not able to pool as much money for these fossil fuel companies. So yeah, that is my climate education journey. It's been a whirlwind, but I've really appreciated it. And again, it's such a full circle moment to be back here at MockCop.
Thank you so much, Ash. And that is so wonderful to hear that MockCop was one of your initial exposures to climate education. That is incredibly wonderful to hear. And I think that also goes to show of the impact of everything that we do today and the work that you can do in your individual communities, what that impact can really have. When you go into a classroom, you can teach every one of these panelists. Every one of us was impacted by a climate teacher in some way. Every one of us was impacted by some exposure to climate education that transformed our lives and made us into agents of change in our local communities, but also internationally. It's given us the opportunity to attend UNFCCC COPs or biodiversity COPs and to really make an impact on policy. And if we give so many other young people that opportunity, we can create a generation of students that are capable and committed of making change in whatever career they want to go into, not just the geographers or the scientists, but also the bankers, but also every career that can also be a green career. So going on to some of the questions that have been asked to our panelists in some pre-submitted options throughout the conference. We have one from the organisers, which is a very basic question, but it's one I'm really excited to hear your reflections on. So first to Sage, what changes do you want to see in our education systems to better address the climate crisis?
I don't know how to I feel like my answer would be like the obvious, but maybe people don't feel like it's obvious. I mean, I think that ecological education should start from kindergarten, because I mean, it really is sad that in the West, people just aren't raised with the knowledge of the ecosystems around them and plant identification and how to grow food. We've become so separated from the earth. And I think as well, I do think that our education system, I mean, you could go into the capitalism, imperialism, and white supremacy, It just wasn't really set up for anyone to succeed, and it wasn't set up for life skills. And I think an ecological education, and then also sustainability. So if I'm thinking ecological being the things, the natural part of things, and then sustainability being where does lithium come from? What is plastic made of? The stuff that we should know as well. I think that both of those should be highly incorporated, and I think other things could be de-emphasized, because there's a lot in the education system that you just don't need or value. But yeah, I would say the most important thing would be starting it from a young age, because really, if you think about propaganda or indoctrination, everything is indoctrination. We try to act like that's not something that everyone undergoes, and it just is. Playing video games is indoctrination. People aren't being raised with a value of the ecosystems that keep us alive, and also a knowledge of the role we play in them. And subsequently, we're still churning out business majors that don't know the first thing about like the food system, and then they go work at JP Morgan and destroy things even further. So I think that if we raise people with like, you know, the knowledge that resources are valuable and limited, and also just like empathy for the earth and for their fellow beings, like I think we would have a very different workforce and different priorities in our economy.
Something that really makes me reflect on, something that I've been researching a lot recently when I talk about public participation in UNFCCC COPs particularly, I link that so like inextricably to climate education, because even though it's not in the formal learning sector, even though it's not necessarily in the classroom, it's still a sense of education, even though it's not from the early years and up. Every facet can be a container for learning. The classrooms can be this one container, but learning environments are migrating out into society. They're something that is participatory, something that's voluntary, something where we're moving from an idea where education has to just be from one authoritative source, but it's now readily available through so many means. Teachers are everywhere. Teachers are so many different types of people, like Ash was talking about earlier. Teachers can be people that are out on the front line. They're experiencing the effects of the climate crisis firsthand. Teachers can also be traditional educators in a classroom, or they could be lecturers in a university, or it could be peer-to-peer learning. Learning, I think, it's so much broader, the learning sector versus the school sector. Learning itself, I think, is an act of growing a level of self-awareness so you can impact the world. And that is spread through so many generations, be it the early years education, or be it people within retirement homes. Every generation can really impact everything. And I think, Ash, your work in social enterprise on Bank for the Better Future, I think that also says a lot about that, even though it's specifically targeted towards universities and young people. It's also something that anybody can do within their own lives to help take action on climate change. Do you have any reflections on this question, Aishwarya?
Yeah, I really like how Sage mentioned the disconnect that we have with our Earth, because when I think about climate education and how it should be done within the education system, something I think a lot about is food, right? Because ever since I was young, and it's not because I was taught in my house to learn like this, it was because I was taught in society to learn like this. And that is that food was a commodity, right? Our earth was a commodity. There are resources, there are economic resources that we can use for our own advantage. That's what I think as young kids we're often taught as, because where do we see food from, at least in urban settings? It's like, as a kid, I've always just, food is just what we buy at grocery stores. It's not, it's not like I go and pick my food from plants in my garden. Well, at the time I was living in an apartment, but it's not like I get to, go and see this food that's grown on the very soil we stand on. So it's taken me now 18 years now where I'm at this point where I understand that food and our earth, they were never a commodity. And it is because of the society that we created, whether it was capitalism, whether it was imperialism, that food and our earth became a commodity, right? And so I think when we look at how climate education really needs to be implemented within our education systems, it's looking at how can we dismantle these notions or these preconceived notions that we've already established within our society and within young children's minds. Like, you go to a young child and you ask them to name 10 fast food restaurants, and I will bet you they will. They'll tell you McDonald's, they'll tell you KFC, they'll talk about Pepsi, right? They'll talk about all these brands, but you ask a child to name plants, a child will not be able to. And that's simply because we don't teach them that. It's not the child's fault. It's because we've created a society in which something is more than the other. And so I think we really need to look at how can we dismantle that entire notion. And something that I love about climate education is that it can really be put into any sort of intrinsic little thing. So I was talking to my teachers, right? And I was telling them about how if I'm writing a data management test, instead of asking me how many burgers I'm going to buy from a fast food restaurant or something like that, maybe we could have like a climate change chart, right? In statistics and data management class, like bringing climate change and bringing the earth into every single subject that we learn about, I think is such an impactful way to kind of slowly implement it as much as possible. Because something that we also need to think about is that teachers are tired, right? Like every time I talk to my teachers, they're like, I really want to do this. It's just, that means I have to rewrite everything. And so as for a quick way to really start and implement climate education would be to use the pre-existing resources that we have within the education systems and tie in climate wherever we can. And I saw that being really successful at my school, because I would help my teachers do that. And they told me that it worked. They were able to do it, right? Like we got in biology class, instead of having a lab on a cell, we had a lab on the environment. And so just like trying to tie in everything that we can with the earth to the subjects that we're currently being taught is, I think, such a good way to implement climate education. The second thing is, I think, listening, right? And that's such like a simple thing. That's probably like general, but listening in general to those on the front lines that are facing the impacts of climate change, right? Because when we're sitting, like if you're sitting comfortably in your home without having ever thought about the climate crisis, or maybe you have, but you've never seen impacts straight up, a lot of the time it's as humans, it's unfortunately it's easy to empathize, but it's hard to completely understand, right? And so when we sit and we listen to the voices of those on the front lines of the climate crisis, and we let young kids also listen and understand how big of an issue this is, I think it motivates young children to really realize the pure, complete expanse that climate change has on our earth. And thirdly, and this is my final point, I promise, is probably we need to be teaching climate education in a way that inspires change and hope within young people, right? Sage was talking about how, like at Berkeley, climate education was mainly taught in like a doomsday format. And I completely agree with that, because every time I talk about climate, or like at my school, everyone knows that I do climate work, right? It's a small school, it's not really that big. So anytime climate change is talked about, or when I hear my friends talk about it, or like people, classmates, they talk about it in a way that like, oh, there's no way we're going to be able to save our earth, right? And I think that's a lot influenced by what they see in media. And I'm usually the person who has to say, no, there are amazing people doing the work that needs to be done. And I believe me when I say this, like we can create changes. We can continue to protect our planet. And we are doing that. And even though the movement is not as big as it needs to be, there are people out there, wonderful people out there doing that work that needs to be done. So I think showing these stories of change, talking about these people, talking about the history behind climate change activism, right? Going like generations back, not just what exists now and not just what's big in the media now, but talking about like Indigenous communities and them protecting their environments, talking about local people in their areas trying to protect what is within their area, right? So I think talking about those stories within school settings and education settings really inspires other young people to also do that work, because the only way we're going to get more people involved within the climate movement, and the only way we're going to get more people willing to take action for our planet, is by inspiring change, and is by inspiring hope. And one of the best ways to do that is through climate education.
Thank you so much for that. I was just scribbling down everything that you've been saying because it's so inspiring and I want to talk about it later online. And I think that is the most perfect way of articulating what we're doing here at Moth EMS. I'd like to ask you both a pre-submitted question now for the delegate from Indonesia, who is Hendry Surya Wictatsana. Their question is, what are some successful examples of youth-led movements that has raised awareness in their local communities and encouraged action on climate change and climate education, and the kinds of things that we can learn from those youth-led initiatives? And I'd just like to start on that front, just on the basis of the food systems and everything that we've been talking about already. There is an organisation here in the UK called Bite Back 2030, and they're absolutely incredible for inspiring this youth-led change on food systems, which is not only environmentally linked, but also linked to what we call here in the UK the cost of living crisis. I'm not sure what that phrase translates to in other countries, but it's about the economy as it is right now and the ways that we respond to that in our household buys and in the way that we manage our money on a day-to-day financial basis. It's been really difficult here in the UK to be able to afford to do the things that we normally do, or to be able to afford bare necessities for a lot of people. And being able to see that, and as well as the environmental changes that we really need in the next couple of years, so both short-term and long-term solutions being merged together to create something that happens in schools where young people can go into their schools and take ownership of the food systems that they see on their plates every day in their school building. It's this really incredible example of local leadership on food systems, both on the issues that local people in the UK are experiencing, but then also the more long-term issue of climate change. So filling both of those problems at the same time and showing that young people have the power to do that within their schools and within national institutions, should they desire to. I'd also like to ask Aishwarya about that, because I'm sure you've had so many experiences with so many amazing youth-led initiatives, and I'd love to hear some really cool examples of some initiatives that you've seen be successful and the things we can learn from them.
Yeah, absolutely. So the first one that comes to mind is CIRBC. CIRBC is Climate Education Reform BC. BC stands for British Columbia, which is a West Coast province in Canada. Now they're a group of 20 young people, right? And they're trying to advocate for education reform within policy and legislation within their own province. So province is just like a state in America, I guess that would translate to. So they're trying to really, really implement and push for that. And honestly, it's been amazing seeing their work, because I think, again, I say this all the time, but young people are pushed out of policy spaces way too much when the policy is literally being created for our lives and our future, which makes no sense at all. Do not ask me why we are pushed out of those spaces, because that's where we actually should be and need to be. And so instead of just trying to exist within those spaces and push through those barriers, these young people are creating those spaces for themselves within policy and legislation. And I think that's so powerful, right? They're stepping up and saying, hey, you're not going to give me space. Well, I'm going to make space for myself. Too bad. And yeah, so they've been continuing to do that. And they're looking at K-12, so like from kindergarten to grade 12 education systems. They've created a list of 6 needs that they believe need to be implemented within policy and legislation in BC, which has been incredible. Another one that I actually think about is it's actually a restoration project. It's called the Manoman Project. And it's a project that one of my very good friends, Laura Lextons, is working on through the University of Guelph, right? And this is a university locally in Ontario. And so Manoman is essentially, it translates to wild rice. It's wild rice that is culturally, spiritually, economically, and nutritionally important to the Anishinaabe, which is an Indigenous group here in so-called Canada. And so settler changes, so this is like colonial changes to the Winnipeg River, have caused Manoman to decline drastically. And so what these students at the University of Guelph are doing is that They're from the School of Engineering at the University of Guelph, and they're working with the Nissechuan Anishinaabe Nation to study and also restore the Menomon in a culturally appropriate way. And when I heard my friend talk about this, I was like, that is so, so cool, right? They're using agents of education, which is being students, and they're using their knowledge that they learn within these schools to really implement and work with frontline communities to restore something that is so crucially important to our food systems and to their food systems within Canada. And yeah, that's like that is a project that my friend has been working on for quite a few years now. And it's just been absolutely incredible to see where it's going. And then another one that I think about is also a food sovereignty program. Food sovereignty is actually something that I've been kind of focusing on recently. So that's why I know a lot of groups that are working on food sovereignty. But essentially, it's just a program in Kitchener-Waterloo, where I'm from. And yeah, they go to local high schools and they build gardens, and they teach these young people about what the food they're planting means and how they're native to this nation. And it's been like, I think they've already reached like 9 to 11 schools, which has been incredible in just the past year. Yeah, so those are just some off the top of my head.
Thank you so much for that, Aishwarya. And Sage, do you have any input for this question?
Yeah, actually.
I think we might have just lost Sage. Okay, I'll move briefly on to the next question, just for a brief input before we get Sage back, and we can go back to that second question. So for the third question, we had the delegate from Lebanon, Mohammed Al-Ahmed, and he asked, how can youth activists effectively engage with educational institutions and policymakers to influence climate education reforms, which is a lot of what both of us have been working on, Aishwarya. So would you be able to give any input on that question and some advice to delegates?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the best ways to get involved with policy work is to contact your local officials, right? Now, I'm not saying every local official will be up for it, but what I am saying is you're making your name known within these spaces, right? Because you need to make your voice known within policy spaces. And it's unfortunate that this needs to happen, but that's how it is for us to be able to get our foot in the door within policy spaces. And so contact your local officials, tell them, hey, like, I'm person working on whatever you're working on climate related, and I would love to work with you and speak with you on how we could perhaps implement so-and-so policies, so-and-so for so-and-so, right? So give them all the reasons. Now, if your local official is not particularly open to policy negotiations on climate, you could literally go to any other local politicians or local change makers, right? Even though they're not the ones representing your region, because they would be willing to listen. Because if there's anything I've learned from working in policy spaces is that there are always people at those decision-making tables who genuinely do care, right? But a lot of the time they're binded by politics, and they're binded by these politics. And it's again, it's just so unfortunate that this is how our political system is and our political landscape works. But they're binded by politics to not be able to speak about it openly. You know, they can't just go out of their way to reach out to these students. And some do, but not everyone does. And so if you went out and reached out to them, 8 out of 10 times, I think they would be willing to listen, because they are the people who want people like you to reach out to them so that they're able to implement the work that you're doing. So do your research, find those local officials who are genuinely interested in climate, and then reach out to them. And I promise you, they will get back to you, because they want you to reach out to you, right? And then I'd say go through organizations like Mock COP, like Youngo. There's so many great organizations. One Up Action, shout out to Kevin and Alia, amazing activists. There's so many organizations out there that you could join, right? You could start volunteering, you could start working for, and then they will be able to connect you to these policy and legislation spaces as well. And actually, that's how I got involved within policy and legislation. It was through Mock COP. So it wasn't out of me cold calling or like reaching out to officials, which I wish I would have done. But also this was my way of getting into policy and legislation work. So I think there's like two main avenues. You could even go through your universities. Sometimes universities have connections to decision-making spaces, right? And also remember that policy and legislation doesn't always have to be governmental. I think that's one thing we always need to keep in mind. Policy and legislation can also be on a community level. Policy and legislation can also be on an education level. It can be within your school, within your university, right? And sometimes policy and legislation, you don't have to always be at like the United Nations conference to make a difference, right? You could be in your hometown talking to your city hall member to make a difference. That is you doing policy work. So don't think you need to have this like be a part of this huge thing to actually have an impact, because those small changes make such a huge difference. Yeah, I think that's about it.
Thank you so much for that. That is such incredible advice and such practical advice too, which is always so helpful when you're a young person trying to navigate the completely unknown waters of policymaking and trying to influence and lobby. And I think I've experienced very similar things here in the UK. A lot of the lack of action, where there is a political official that is somebody that would really like to take action, a lot of the lack of action comes from their political party or from their local government forcing their focus in another direction. And something that I found really useful is getting together with a group of people, either within my local constituency, if it is my local representative, or getting together with a group of people that can just email this person or call this person, because the amount of emails that they get will move it up the agenda of the things that they have to care about. And you can kind of create that demand for them politically to be able to respond. It would give them a justification to their party or to the local government of why they're spending their time focusing on this, why they're spending their public money, dedicating their time towards this. And that can give them that really great justification to help do the things that you want to see them implement in your local community or in the national sense. And I think that is also something that I found is when there's quite a distinction between local governments and national governments and the accessibility. And national governments, it really helped me to be able to get through organizations like Mock COP and Teach the Future, because just emailing the Department for Education here in England, you're not going to get anywhere. It's you're probably just going to get some bounce back emails, maybe a copy and paste type email thanking you for responding to them and thanking you for getting in touch and being active. It's really difficult to be able to get through that and into civil servants and into people that can help make a change. Something that really helped us at Mock COP was knowing people almost on the inside and being on LinkedIn and being connected with people through youth advocacy efforts who can make introductions by email to civil servants that are working on that policy area, being able to ask them questions, have those kinds of 20-minute Zoom chats where you just talk about what you're thinking about and talk about their work and take an interest in them as people. And having those kinds of connections, building those connections, really helped us to be able to establish a presence within that space, within that national governmental institution. And that really helped us to be able to then do some really cool work at places like COP26 and COP27 and start implementing governmental policy. And as a student that is about to go and study diplomacy, that is the central thing of diplomacy. That is also such a very key diplomatic strategy. It's something where you can create those kind of personable connections where you see people as people instead of just as thematic areas. And just on Sage, we're just hearing in the chat that Sage has lost internet connection, so won't be able to rejoin us, although she has been trying over the last 10 minutes or so. So very sadly, we won't be able to hear Sage's reflections on those last two questions. But I would love to see some reflections on social media and afterwards online to be able to see our delegates' reflections on what those questions could be in your local context, particularly what kind of youth-led movements are going on in your country that are being successful? What are the key things that you think that we can learn from them in our countries? Both Aishwarya and I come from countries that don't necessarily have a frontline perspective in Canada and the UK, although both of us have links to other countries and links to other areas that may do. I think hearing those reflections from other people could be a really great way to enrich our practice and make sure that the work that we're doing on a global level is something that truly reflects everybody, something that reflects global citizenship. So that really marks the end of our Youth Action on Climate Education panel. And thank you so much to all of our brilliant speakers for lending us their time and inspiring contributions. We've had many technical issues, but it's been so good to talk to you, Ash, and it's been so good to talk to Sage and to speak online with the other delegate and other panelists that weren't able to join us. I am so happy that this mock EMS is happening. Having been involved in the original EMS, it makes me so happy to see this kind of event happening, to be able to build young people's capacity to engage in these decisions, both globally and in their own countries. So thank you so much to everyone that joined us, whether you're on Zoom or whether you're a public viewer on YouTube. We really hope that you enjoyed this as much as we did. So for some housekeeping, delegates, we're now going to move into the final voting session, so please stay in this main room. For those of us joining online, please join us for the closing ceremony at 8 p.m. UTC. Please don't forget to share your thoughts and experiences at the Mock EMS on social media and tag MockCop on Twitter and Instagram using the hashtags MockEMS and Climate Education. Thank you so much, everybody. You can see a message in the chat right now in all 3 languages, telling you those hashtags again and telling you the MockCop @. It would be great to hear your reflections online and to see all of your engagement in this topic area.